Hello, welcome to today's video. This video, we're going to talk about the tree tool in Alteryx. Tree tool belongs to an interface, so it's often used for macro or app that allow end user to configure the input for the workflow. Commonly, we often use checkbox, radio button, text box. But if you want a bit more dynamic and particular, some kind of hierarchical information structure, tree tool is the one we go for. So in the interface, you can see on the top, that's the last one. Let's have a look, a quick demo how the tool is configured. As a big context, the whole workflow, the dataset is used by another video. So I'll probably put link somewhere on top. The idea is we're going to allow the user to receive some report about assets they own within the organization. So the assets divided to different type. So the top level is site A, B, C. So for example, in your S3 bucket, in your Snowflake environment, in your Tableau server. With a drill down, so top level, you can select as a checkbox you would expect. You can select everything within the sublist, or you can be more selective. Let's say individual item in site B. So let's see how we can create this tree hierarchy. Let me show you the workflow. To make things dynamic, I did it as a two parts, a chained app. The first app, let's probably just have a look at the formula output here. The thing I want to bring attention to first is the two ID column. So dummy ID 1, dummy ID is basically level 1 indicator. Dummy ID 2 is level 2, which corresponding to individual items. So the idea is we want to label your item and we want to be able to concatenate things together to form a kind of unique ID to keep track each item. If we will look at the output, top left of the screen. So the way I did too, I did is by concatenate with and dash in between. One thing for the tree tool you got to remember is it treats all the things as input as a string. It does not treat them as numbers. So ID, even though I use numbers, I want to make sure they are the same structure. Hence, the use of pad left. I want to make sure our length to be equal. Because otherwise, for example, you want to sync item 1 and item 11, you think they are numbers, they will be sorted as it is. Turns out they don't. The tree tool will consider number 1 as a single, as a string with length 1 and 11 as a string length 2. They actually behave as different level of item. So I pad left to make the equal length. The dash in between make life easier to pass out the information. So it's easier to find out what's the level 1 information, what's the level 2 information. Regex, you can use regex much easier if you have a fixed structure. The tools, I use the last formula. We can probably click there, go to the right. So I've created a column and I call it key and description. The key is basically the menu too. So you may not need to create a separate one. Just make it easier to keep track of things. The description is the one you see in the interface where the text, so a bit more context for the user rather than just a bunch of IDs. One thing I want to pay your attention to, probably the very bottom of it. So as see in the previous case in the demo, in the level 1, we have set ABC. So for level 1 items, they do not, the key you can see is a single part rather than a two-part form to complete. You do need to have them to separate differently. So if you do not include that, you may not get the level 1 to show up. So goes back to the previous point. You have a dash or slash underscore something to form a fixed structure and then make it easier to tell the Alteryx which level, the tree to which level to pick. It's a good practice. Personally, I find this is the way I do it. It's reasonably intuitive for me, and I prefer to share this method with everyone else. Before we proceed, let's have a look my output for the app one. Personally, I prefer to keep two separate output. Just single select two to output the key and the description. You will see that's the key value pair used by the tree tool to configure dynamically for the user to select. The second output is for the dataset to follow along through the app. A user change the app depends on how you deploy things. I currently just set as local file. You can, if you deliver your app on a server, you probably change it up to a particular file path on the server. Or if you want for the app to be used more freely, maybe you can set as a temp folder for the machine. Click on app 2. Let's see how they are being used. The tree tool on top, it's very complicated to set up. If we see, you do take in various data source. For my experience, I do find creating my own key value pair is actually straightforward and easy to manipulate. So that's why custom file database is the one I go for. The 12th column, we can see, is to do in the properties. That's why it's called key and the description. This tool is quite easy to use. It's almost once you get a key value set up in the first place, it's quite easy for the tool itself to configure rather than for you to do additional manipulation. The only thing you probably need to be careful is in the workflow. Let's look at the text input. It's a dummy field I've created. Let's actually see. One thing to note for the tree tool is the tree tool, even though you can have multiple selection on the tree tool, they will concatenate your option together into a single cell. So that's why the text input, I only use a single cell, even though it has multiple rows in it. With that, we can see the purpose of the second text column. We use new line as a split rows to break it into different components. At the moment, for this particular work, we used only 2 levels, but if you more than that, you can really repeat the steps. The formula tool I used to create a bit structure, so you can see I use regex to pass out information which belong to level 2, information which belong to level 1 information, and we can use filter to do the corresponding selections. So the first filter, the idea is, okay, for example, in this particular key, we select 001, I think that's site C. The inner join should return all the items in the site C. So you can see that's almost like a batch selection. We don't worry about individual items. Anything that's not selected in this setup is the left join. So that belongs to site B and site A. They will continue to flow to the next processing. So the next step with level 2, we have individual item. So the mean here is some kind of in 003 up to item number 5. Among other things, we perform a union that includes all the one that's selected. Anything that's not selected, we can feed into separate workflow. To feed, we run a workflow that will handle as what kind of logic you would need to perform. So we can see with the correct configuration, no tree to itself has almost their minimum requirement to play with. But all the things kind of done rather than within the tree tool itself. It's more to do with the input into the tree tools. So let's probably click back to follow one, the key value pair, as you see on the screen. For the end user, it depends how many levels you want to build. For me, I think the most complicated, I probably go only level 3. So 3 structure with 2 dash in between to break up, then you can have some kind of filter tool, does the job. If you have more levels, maybe you can go one route, say you have iterative macro to pass out information to treat each level at one time. Yes, you could. Or I think regex counting the level and use different filter to break them up to proceed and probably do some deep duplications if you multiple select or not. That's another valid route to use. So once you set your structure correctly, set up a key description, the tool is quite easy to be configured. So go give it a try, and thanks for watching.